a guy confessed to killing his mother, and turned out she was alive. The number of people that I have seen who have talked their way out of criminal charges is absolutely zero.
Wow.
You have a right to remain silent, and you should exercise it.
Your personal opinion.
Sure.
Do you think there are innocent people incarcerated?
Absolutely. There are mistakes that you can make that you just can't come back from. And this woman who was like at the time 3 weeks postpartum gets arrested and spends 24 hours in central booking in Manhattan. We've gone to trial, and I've been successful. I've gotten acquittals on cases with clients that had overwhelming evidence against them. I'm talking about DNA, multiple eyewitnesses, video surveillance. I mean, only guilty people take pleas. And I mean, that is just not true. Yeah.
Now, did you ever defend somebody that you thought inside that he's guilty? Today, we have a highly respected criminal defense attorney based in New York, correct?
Yes, sir.
With years of experience. His name is Joe Amsel. He has a reputation for both. He can be fearless in the courtroom, but he can also be compassionate for his clients. We will talk about the consequences of incarceration, and we want to educate the public about the realities of law, crime, and justice. Joe, welcome to the Struggle Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it a lot. Before we get into anything, before we start, let's first discuss the difference from federal and criminal. What's the difference of the crimes?
There's criminal is sort of the broad term, and then there's crimes that are charged in state court and crimes that are charged in federal court.
What are the differences?
The differences, well, I mean, there's different crimes that the federal government has jurisdiction over. Generally, things that involve interstate commerce, that is federal jurisdiction generally. And then state crimes usually will involve stuff that happens within the actual state. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference. In terms of the consequences, the severity, the state and federal system, particularly comparing it to New York, where I primarily practice, the difference between state and federal court is pretty stark. There's a significant difference in terms of sentencing. In the federal system, they go by the federal sentencing guidelines, which are sort of like a point system that drive the range of months of a sentence. In the state court for nonviolent crimes, there's generally sort of a broad statutory range, and the judge has discretion to pretty much do whatever he or she wants within that range. In the state system, there are mandatory minimums that apply, but so there's a lot of differences in terms of the potential exposure, in terms of the potential sentencing, as well as also the types of cases that you will see in state court versus federal court. There's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of similarities, but there also is a lot of differences.
Now, the way I understand it, and tell me if this is true, the state is more lenient than the federal?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say that. It really is a case-by-case basis, analysis. Like, for example, I just recently tried a case in state court in which my client was had a prior violent felony, and what's considered a violent felony is pretty much dictated by statute. The law defines what's violent. Ironically enough, not every crime that necessarily involves violence is, or should I say, you can have crimes that don't involve violence that are considered a violent felony. And sort of the classic example of that is like burglary in the second degree. If you burglarize somebody's home, then even though no one gets hurt, there's no violence, there's no weapons used, that's still considered a violent felony. Right. Largely because of what the potential dangers are when you go into someone's home. But sort of the definition of a violent felony is pretty much whatever the legislature says it is. So this guy had a prior violent felony in his past, and he was charged with possessing a gun. And because of his history, he faced a mandatory minimum in the state system of 7 years and a maximum of 15 years. In the federal system, with that kind of history and the charge that he was charged with, sort of just straight possessing a gun, probably would have had a sentencing exposure that was significantly less, and there would have been no mandatory minimums. So the state system could be more lenient on, for example, like white collar crimes. But the federal but I wouldn't say that's a blanket statement that the
Right.
federal system is stricter than the state.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there are a lot of differences, but to say that they're sort of blanket, one's more
Right.
lenient and one's more harsh, I think is probably an oversimplification.
I see. Also, you were an assistant to the DA in Queens, right?
Yes.
For a lot of years.
Yeah.
How many years did you spend?
I was prosecuted for about 5 years.
5 years. So you were actually on the other side of the
Correct.
aisle. You were
Correct.
working for the government.
Yeah, it's a very normal
Yeah.
normal career path for
Right.
people that do defense work like I do, having been a former prosecutor.
Right.
And it gives you an insight into sort of
Right.
how a particular office functions, how cases are built, and you get a good sense of how the case looks like from their side, and then
What did you see over there when you used to work at the DA's office? Is the government here to protect, or is the government here because they have to have a certain amount of cases, and this is like a badge of honor? This is what we do, and if we get on a case, we get it done, and nobody fights with us. You better take a plea. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think that by and large, most prosecutors want to do the right thing. I think nobody becomes a prosecutor with the intent on screwing people over or throwing the book at people. That being said, are there abuses? Sure, because any system that is made by man for man is necessarily going to have
Right.
the human element to it. And have I seen prosecutors, sort of go hard after someone because of personal vendettas or, emotional investment in a case? Absolutely. I think the more common issue that you see is what I like to call inertia, like a bureaucratic inertia, where you have sort of a policy that gets applied, and it's sort of a one-size-fits-all policy, and there's no real analysis of every single case, whether a particular policy should or should not apply. And it's sort of like, well, this is our policy, take it or leave it, nothing I can do about it. The other thing that always is of concern is, especially on the state level, prosecutors are political animal. I mean, they're elected, right? And so when they're elected, you have the issue of public pressure. And the one thing that every politician and every bureaucrat that works within a bureaucracy is always concerned about is the public perception of what it is that they're doing. And so it's always easier to sort of say, look, we have an identified victim or a witness who's telling us X, Y, and Z. We're not about to dismiss a case, even though we have doubts about their veracity, even though we have doubts about whether they're telling us the truth, and even though, their story kind of sounds a little fugazi. But you know what? Look, this is what they're telling, and so there can sometimes be this sort of tendency to kick the can down the road and let someone else make the decision, let the court make the decision.
Right.
And a lot of times you have a judge who will say, well, let the jury make the decision, and then sometimes you end up having to go to trial and fight cases just because sometimes people don't want to stand up and be courageous and say, you know what, I'm going to take the slings and arrows, and I'm going to, and I shouldn't say do the right thing, because you can always understand why they're doing what they're doing. Not always, but for the most part. But sort of that's I think the true danger, sort of like, oh, there's political pressure. There's sort of an impression that this is what we have to do under these circumstances. And then, once they stake out a position, then there's really, it's very difficult to get them to back off of it. So that's that.
Right.
But I think, do prosecutors wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, we're going to nail it"? No, I don't think so. I
That's not
think
the
that
case.
there's I think most
There's a certain integrity there.
Yes, and when there's a breakdown in it, in the integrity, and when there are, and there have been issues in the past, but I think that for the most part they're out to do justice, to do right by the public. They have an important role, and the role is to keep the public safe, and to be zealous advocates for their client, which is either the government or the people, and And I mean, I have nothing but respect and admiration for the
Well,
overwhelming majority of my adversaries that I come up against.
yeah. So let me ask you a question. In your personal opinion,
Sure.
do you think there are innocent people incarcerated
Absolutely.
all the time?
Absolutely.
You're 100% sure about
100%.
that.
100%.
There are people just fall
But
through the cracks.
what is there? But what I mean, that's been proven. I mean, there's been people that have been exonerated by
Yeah.
DNA and so
Yeah.
forth. So the fact that there are people out there that were innocent of the crime that were ultimately, convicted is absolutely happens. But what I think is more common, and which doesn't get as much attention, is that there are people out there who are guilty of something, but not guilty of everything that they've been charged with. And those are the folks that I think are the far more common.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Now, let me ask you something. If someone falls into a dispute with a neighbor or with a friend or in business or with somebody, how does a person manage a dispute so he doesn't get involved in these criminal activities?
So I'm not going to give any legal advice, disclaimer,
Yeah.
but you got to just be careful. Don't do anything stupid. Don't say or do anything.
Physical.
Yeah,
Even texting, I think, in business, people are like, people owe each other money, or they deliver the material and the material is not paid for. I'm going to go now and I'm going to pick it up. Now, this is a crime.
Self-help. It's
Yeah.
called self-help. Yeah.
Yeah. Texting, they would say that this is harassment. So where I want to get to is everyone has a right to arrest another person. So let's say if I want, I can get you arrested now. So the question is, what do you make of this? I mean, I could say whatever I want. This guy hit me. He has to be taken in.
Yeah.
Now you go through the system, and then the guy comes out and he arrests you now. How does that make any sense?
So that's probably the single most shocking revelation to many of my clients who have never been involved with the criminal justice system.
Right.
And I'll tell you a funny story. I literally just resolved a case for a client who, I'm not going to get into too many of the details, but she was a doctor, okay? Great reputation, complete misunderstanding with a coworker. And the coworker made an allegation and got this woman arrested. And I mean, based on total fictitious nonsense, but got her arrested.
Yeah.
And this woman who was like at the time 3 weeks postpartum gets arrested and spends 24 hours in central booking in Manhattan. And ultimately, I got the case dismissed. And ultimately, there was a lawsuit that we filed, and we were successful in that as well. But the bottom line is that people are most shocked, particularly people who have never been involved with the system, is that all it takes to get someone arrested is to have an identified civilian witness say, "I accuse."
Yeah.
And it's almost like, when I was a prosecutor, I had cops in my office all the time. It was sort of like a joke. You'd have cops sitting in the office, and you'd walk into the office and you'd say, "He hit me. I have substantial pain, annoyance, and alarm. Arrest him."
Right.
And really, that's all it takes.
That's
all it really takes. And so I think that to protect yourself, again, I'm not giving any legal
Right.
advice, but be smart. Like people send text messages. I've had cases. I'm going to come get you. Like, what does "get you" mean?
Right.
Like, I had a case where a guy texted a landlord. It was a landlord-tenant dispute,
Yeah.
and he said, "I'm going to, if you want to fight or something, I'm going to beat you and expose you to the community."
Mm-hmm.
Like beat you? Like, does that mean like beat you in a landlord-tenant dispute? Does that
Right.
mean like beat you physically? Does that mean beat you, in a lawsuit? Like, what does that mean? And yet this guy went and got arrested, and all the police need is an identified civilian witness. And there's a joke within the police department. It's called CV states, means complaining victim states. I mean, all you really need to arrest somebody is just say complaining victim states. And it could be the most fugazi story in the world. It could be a story that literally doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yet she said it. And so Let's go with it.
And this is dangerous in the workforce also, because there's these women who accuse people of sexual harassment or any other thing,
Yeah.
and it's your word against her, and this is stuff that's happening all the time.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, the flip side to that is, well, what's the alternative?
Correct.
Do you want that every time somebody is a victim of a crime, they have to come in with corroboration, they have to come in with video, they have to come in with
Witnesses.
with document, with two, like if that were the case, then we'd never be able to prosecute cases, because at the end of the day, where do people generally try to commit crimes? They try to commit crimes in areas and places where there are no witnesses. Exactly. So like, and this is a major issue where, you're trying like cases that involve like one witness, and you have this issue all the time where, you might have a witness and from the prosecutor's perspective, they want to say, well, and the law is that you can be convicted based on the testimony of one witness.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk in the public about, identification witnesses being, unreliable. And there's been a ton of social science on that point, particularly if it's a cross-racial identification, or if it's, the lighting conditions. And there are a number of factors that the courts look at and that juries are instructed to look at in order to consider whether or not an identification is reliable. But at the end of the day, identification testimony or the testimony of one witness is sufficient. And people have a problem with that. Nonetheless, even though it's legally sufficient, it's okay under the law.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, that's ridiculous. I mean, I can't just try. Like, what if he's mistaken?
Right.
Like, what if they're just not? What if and they can genuinely believe that they're identifying the correct person.
Right.
And yeah, so getting back to the point of like, like what do you do? I mean, you have to have a system that allows for protection of potential victims, but on the other hand, it does expose a lot of innocent people to frivolous claims.
So this person who is innocent, I mean, he never went through the system. Now he gets arrested. What is the procedure? They take him down to the station first.
Yeah.
And there's walk us through what a person, if he gets arrested.
Sure.
The holding cell, then waiting for a judge. God forbid it's on a weekend.
Yeah.
And then he ends up. Walk us through this.
So it really depends on the jurisdiction. It depends if it's state or federal. It depends if it's even within the state system, if it's local village, or if it's like in Rockland County or in Nassau County. It really depends. It's very jurisdiction specific. But I can sort of walk you through the general steps in New York City. In New York City, there are night court arraignments. The arraignment is the initial appearance before a judge, where the judge makes a determination of bail. So there's courts that are open from 9 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock at night. So almost the whole day. And the process is a police officer makes an arrest, whether it's out on the street or it's a prearranged surrender. Person comes into the precinct. They'll be fingerprinted. They'll be photographed. The officer or the detective, whoever's processing the case, will then do their paperwork, which can sometimes take a while.
Yeah.
There's some gamesmanship on that in terms of how to play the overtime game.
Right.
So you can imagine.
In the meantime, every police station has a holding cell.
Correct. Every police station has a holding cell. There's a holding cell usually on the first floor of the precinct, and there's usually a holding cell up on the second floor, depending if it's a detective arrest versus a patrol arrest. But either way, there are cells within the precinct. Again, this is in New York City and pretty much in all precincts. And then the cops will do their paperwork. They'll send it off to the prosecutor's office, the DA's office. The DA's office will then have to draft up a criminal court complaint that gets filed with the court. That process also takes a while.
How many hours are we talking about now?
We're talking, generally speaking, in New York City, it's about 24 to sometimes 36 hours that you can languish in central booking. It depends. Central booking is the courthouse. It's the police side of the courthouse, and then they bring him into the arraignment in front of a judge.
That's in central booking.
That's in. I mean, in the courthouse. Yeah. Right. So central booking is sort of like a hub within the courthouse.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So that's hours and hours of a person just being accused. I mean, we don't know if he's innocent yet or not. Goes through this system. And this is hard.
And then what's even worse is that imagine it's a serious crime, or a judge makes a determination that they should be held without bail, or that bail should be set that they cannot afford. Right. They haven't been convicted of any crime. They may have a job. They may have a family that relies on them. They may have a life on the outside, and then they go to a jail awaiting.
Everything is awaiting.
Your entire life shuts down. your entire life shuts down. Like, I mean,
And how does the bail work? Is it cash, check, real estate? How does that work?
so good question. In New York State, there are basically there's three forms of bail now. There's there's cash bail where you just pay to get out of jail.
Yeah, but someone can show up with 50 grand in cash,
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it happens.
and then you don't have to. Does someone have to answer where this is coming from?
Occasionally, depending on the nature of the charge, if it's like, for example, a drug charge or a charge that involves
That makes it suspicious.
that makes it suspicious. So then they may ask what's called a bail surety hearing, which is effectively the prosecutor and a judge reviews sort of what the source of the money is to try to make sure that it's not ill-begotten gains that are being used for bail. But assuming it's legitimate money, what they'll do is so that's cash bail. Then there's what's called a partially secured bond. A partially secured bond is effectively where, let's say it's a $100,000 partially secured bond, that 10%, which means that you have to put up $10,000 cash, and then you have to be able to sign, or multiple people have to sign, saying that if this guy doesn't show back up to court, I'm going to be on the hook for the remaining $90,000. So that's another form that's partially secured bond. It's secured by your signature. And then the third form is an actual bond, where essentially you have either usually a bail bondsman that puts up, you pay the bondsman a fee plus a percentage, and if it's 100,000, and he lays out and he writes a bond that says that if this guy doesn't come back to court, I will pay the bond, and that bond is secured by property, meaning that like if there's a car or real estate that they can put up as collateral, that the bondsman will therefore write the bond based on the collateral that you put up. So in federal court, it's a little different. In federal court, depending on the charges, drug charges, gun charges, there could be a presumption that they have to be detained, meaning that they have to be held without bail. In the state system, in New York at least, you're not allowed to consider the defendant's potential dangerousness to the community, although it gets considered anyways, just under the guise of something else. But in the federal system, the judge is allowed to consider the potential dangers to the community and or their potential flight risk. But ironically, in the federal system, in many cases, it's a lot easier to get bail. In the state system, on a lot of cases, so like I said, that's why, you asked me before, like if one system is more
Better
strict than the other. Yeah. Like on a white collar case in federal court, it's very rare for there to be bail. Very rare.
Now, what do most people do? They do the bail bondsman, or they do?
It really depends on the case. It depends on the individual client's situation. A lot of times, it's easy to do the unsecured bond. But you have to have people that are willing to sign that actually have legitimate income.
You're involved with the bond too. So let's say if you have a client, would they tell you, "Can you take care of the bail bonds?"
No,
I'm not involved with that.
No, I'm not involved in that. Although I can
recommend them somebody where to go.
Just, but I'm.
It's not your
generally.
thing.
Yeah, that's not really my.
Now, so after that is done, there's the bail. Now this is crazy. What happens after? Let's say you have the bail and you're out on the street. Now there's a court date waiting for you, right? Yep. A trial?
No.
This is first.
The first. I mean,
first
it can be
the court.
The average life cycle of a felony case, both in state and federal court, is at least a year to 2 years before the case goes to trial. I mean, I just recently tried a case that was over 3 years old.
3 years.
Yeah.
So going in, you know already that this is going to be, first of all, it costs a lot of money.
Yep.
And a lot of sleepless nights.
Yep.
Not to know what is really going on.
The uncertainty is probably
the worst thing.
The worst part about the whole system. And I mean,
tell people before, listen, this is going to happen. This is how long it's going to take, and this is what you're looking at. Then you know a little bit.
Correct.
I mean, it's hard, but you
Correct.
can prepare.
Yeah.
But the uncertainty is a bad position to be.
I always and it sucks, but I mean, a lot of times that's you see clients just grappling with this. That like yesterday they had a life where they thought at least they had some degree of certainty or predictability about what was going to happen with them. I mean, really, it's sort of a lesson for us all that there really is no such thing
as no certainty.
But I mean, you see it in such a stark way with clients who are facing criminal charges, just the way their life is in complete disarray. Everything that they thought they knew about their life yesterday
Yeah.
has now changed, and it has changed indefinitely. And you never know when it's going to change back. You don't know when you're going to get that level of certainty. And I see that level of uncertainty, and I always and unfortunately, you know, I tell clients all the time, like, this is what it feels. I mean, like, this is the level of uncertainty is just
It's unbelievable.
it's unbelievable. It really is.
Unbelievable stuff. Now, what is the process of? Do you, as an attorney, do you push the idea of making pleas rather than go to trial? I mean, that's the word on the street is nobody ever won the government. This is federal, but even in other places, is plea something?
Not true.
Not true.
I've won a lot, thankfully. But I'll say this: the decision of whether or not to plead guilty is ultimately, at its core, a decision of the beast that I know versus the beast that I don't. We talked about uncertainty, okay? And it's really about an individual defendant's or a client's appetite for rolling the dice, for the uncertainty.
Right.
And, you know, behind one door, you have potential full acquittal and you walk free. And this is like it never happened.
Right.
Behind another door is usually greater consequences than what you would receive by the plea. And so if you make that cost-benefit analysis, sometimes it just doesn't make sense for a client to roll the dice and risk what's behind door number two if he knows he has that level of certainty. Look, you know, and in federal court, there is no level of certainty. One of the major differences between federal court and state court when it comes to sentencing is that in federal court, you plead guilty 99.99% of the time. You have no clue what the sentence is going to be. In state court, you generally have a much better idea of what the sentence is going to be. And so, you know, that level of uncertainty is so palpable that a lot of times people just naturally, particularly people that have a lot to lose, they naturally gravitate versus to the beast that it sort of becomes a lesser of two evils. And what makes it even worse is that when your lawyer's telling you, well, look, I mean, the evidence against you is overwhelming, the likelihood of you being convicted is significant,
Right.
then may as well jump on the plea. That being said, I've had many cases and many clients where, look, I've had overwhelming evidence against my client, overwhelming evidence, and the client, for whatever reason, personal or whatever, just couldn't take a plea, and we've gone to trial, and I've been successful. I've gotten acquittals on cases where the clients that had overwhelming evidence against them. I'm talking about DNA, multiple eyewitnesses, video surveillance. I mean, it happens because again, trials are by humans for humans, and things happen throughout the trial. And if you know what you're doing, you can make those things happen. But the point is that the reason why there are so many pleas within the system is because it's just if you go to trial and you lose, you usually get a much higher sentence than what you would receive by a plea. And so it's really the beast that you know versus the beast that you don't.
It's a complicated decision.
It's a very complex decision. It's a very emotional decision. It's a decision that if a client has family and it's tough. But that's the decision and so, because of that uncertainty that we discussed before, people want that level of certainty.
Now let me ask you, if a case goes to trial or whatever the case is, and your client is found guilty, do you prepare this person what to expect in jail? He's going to come the first day, the loneliness, the gangs, whatever we know on the street. What are they supposed to expect?
So there are consultants that, particularly for white
professional consultants.
Professional consultants that you can bring into a case.
What about not white collar? Because sometimes the person is accidentally getting involved.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, it's very rare that you have a client who has no prior exposure to the criminal justice system, who commits a serious, generally a violent felony that's going to result in a lengthy period of a strict incarceration, medium to maximum security incarceration, who is not incarcerated pre-trial. Okay.
Right.
So most of the time, by the time they're going upstate or they're going to a prison, they've already spent a significant amount of time in the local lockup.
Right.
And that acclimation to the environment is just, I mean, that is hell on earth for a lot of people. People, who have never had any exposure to just that level of violence and that level of, I mean, a lot of these correctional facilities, just there's just the apathy that's from unfortunately from some of the staff, just like I said, the level of violence and
This is
borderline corruption that goes on.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's a really
it's
tough.
a shock of a lifetime.
It's the shot. It is.
Now you're talking about Rikers Island.
Yeah, I'm talking about Rikers or other local lockups.
What I read and what I heard is that they're taking dead people out of there on a daily basis. They're like, you hear the most craziest things coming out of that place. That is a jungle.
Yes.
And nobody's doing anything about it. I mean, because you see, I look at it as, and tell me if I'm, I don't know. There is a jail, and the jail is the punishment, or whatever the case is. Then there is another punishment. Place looks dirty. There's no food, and the people around you. It's a double whammy.
What's worse is, as I indicated before, the people in Rikers Island have not been convicted of anything.
Correct.
Yet. They're innocent until proven guilty. Yeah. One of the funniest things any potential juror ever told me was I was trying a case in Queens years ago, and there was a frum guy who was on the panel, and we were talking about like the principle. I usually talk to potential jurors about like the principles that the presumption of innocence is one of those principles, and this goes back to 1776, to the founding of this country. It goes back even before that. And the guy had a very refreshing take on it. He looked at me and he goes, "I don't understand. This guy's presumed innocent." He goes, "There's two court officers sitting behind your client with their feet up against his chair to prevent them from running away. What kind of presumption of innocence is that?"
Yeah.
Honestly, I had nothing to say to him.
Right.
No, obviously, I understand why that has to be the case for security and all that. And
there's no innocence there.
Yeah, I mean.
Now, let me ask you, this humiliation that is going on from when a person they pick up somebody and they go through the system for the crime, is this designed this way psychologically to break the person? Because there could be a way because like I said before, prison is a punishment itself. It's enough.
Yeah.
He's going to be away from his family. He's locked up. He's not needed. There's plenty to deal with besides the sanitary and besides, is the humiliation part of it?
You're talking about the humiliation of like the public humiliation of having been.
Everything. It's humiliating.
I mean, it's not supposed to be, but as a practical matter, is it? Yeah, sure. I mean, it sucks.
It's designed this way.
The question is it the feature or is it the bug?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Like what came first, the chicken?
Right. So jails is just a holding. Jails is not prison. Prison
Correct.
is a long-term thing.
Correct.
Right. So Rikers is just for a year. No, like more than a year.
No, the Rikers Island is the local jail in New York City that holds pretrial detainees. That is people who are waiting for their day in court to be tried.
Either
or
they
to take
have
a plea.
No bail, or
either they have no bail, or there's a bail that
them bail.
Either they have no bail or they can't afford the bail.
Right.
Or it is for people who have been sentenced on misdemeanor charges who are serving up to a year in jail. Sometimes you can have people serving consecutive year sentences in Rikers, so you can, in theory, have somebody sitting on Rikers Island as a sentenced prisoner for 2 years. But not so common. But yeah, so that's what Rikers Island is for.
But in the U.S., you would say that Rikers is the worst place?
It's definitely up there as one of the worst facilities.
In New York. A lot of times, do you see that people will take a plea bargain, even if they know, they're innocent, but they can't take this whole ordeal?
Absolutely. People will absolutely fold because they can't stand the pressure of the situation. Yeah. They can't stand taking the risk that it would take. They don't have the money. They don't have the wherewithal to continue to fight.
So
and
how
they
many
will
months or how many years are they willing to pay for this?
So, I mean, that's usually a case-by-case basis. But this is what I told you before. When you have people that are the more common scenario is you have people that are doing time that are innocent of some of the charges, but not necessarily innocent of all the charges. That's one of the reasons why people take pleas. One of the biggest fictions that unfortunately a lot of prosecutors are laboring under this fiction that only guilty people take pleas. That is the biggest, and I mean that is just not true. And over the courts used to believe this also, but as time has gone by, many more and more courts have sort of come to the realization that even though when somebody pleads guilty, they're asked all these questions: Are you pleading guilty freely and voluntarily? Are you pleading guilty of your own free will? Are you pleading guilty because in fact you are guilty? Is it true that on or about this and this day you did it? You did X, Y, and Z, and isn't it true? Even though you say all that, okay, courts have recognized that people who are actually innocent sometimes plead guilty.
Wow.
And so, and I think this idea is catching on. But yes, I've seen clients absolutely just fold, and they take pleas just because the pressure and the risk of going to trial and losing is so great, and they have so little confidence in the system to actually weed out the truth from the falsity that people do take pleas. Absolutely, it happens all the time.
Now, I went to visit a couple of people in prison years ago. So supposedly the warden and the officers in the prison, they're supposed to protect the people in the prison. It's their officials from the government. Now, what happens if a prisoner wants to complain on the warden? This guy is supposed to be a top guy, and then the officers. Where is he supposed to go? What is he supposed to do? And does he have even any right over there?
Good luck.
Yeah.
There are lawsuits. You can bring, civil rights lawsuits. That's an entire area of practice.
Wow.
Prisoner rights litigation.
Right.
But the reality is that administratively within the system, what can you do? Not a lot, unfortunately.
And not only that, are they going to pay a price for that? So let's say if you put in complaint, is there a place in prison
Yes.
where you can put a complaint on this and this officer,
yes.
right?
Yes.
But you'll pay a price for this.
Potentially. And in fact, in New York State prison, one of the factors that they look at when you go to the parole board is whether or not you've had any frivolous lawsuits that you filed.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's... So to answer your question, I mean, is there technically an inspector general? Is there technically a place to go for corruption or for something that goes on within the facility? Absolutely, there is technically. Does it always necessarily work? No, I mean, and also think about it from the investigator's perspective.
Right.
I mean, like, what else are you going to have in prison? I mean, they're saying, it's just sour grapes. It's just a guy who doesn't like a situation, who's doing X amount of time, who's just trying to make up a complaint because he's trying to set up a lawsuit or something like that, But there is litigation. There are litigation options. There are lawyers that handle exclusively almost prisoner litigation,
Right.
and occasionally it's successful, but it's always an uphill battle for sure.
Wow, it's unbelievable stuff. And between your clients, and you were doing this for a lot of years, did you see prisoners become creative in prison? Like, crazy stories that...
Meaning, like, for what? Creative
survival.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, it's funny you say that. I've had clients that have shown an unbelievable amount of, like, artistic creativity.
Correct.
I had a client not too long ago. He comes out of the cells. He was doing time on Rikers, waiting on a case. Originally he was facing like 25 years. I ended up getting him a really good deal, like 2 to 4. But he comes out one day for one of the court appearances, and his wife's in the audience, and he's got this like paper origami that he made, like a flower bouquet made out of like paper. The most unbelievably intricate and artistic thing I've ever seen in my unbelievable. And he asked the court, can you give this to my wife? And they let him pass it. It was unbelievable. It was like huge. It was like this big thing that just had like all these flowers sticking out of it. And so, I've seen that
because what happens is that the desperation And
It's also
being
just
alone,
the time.
at a time that
Time.
brings out a certain, criminals will use, they'll make knives from whatever, from
Yeah,
glass, from
that's
metals, from wood,
yeah.
and all these. But even art and all the other stuff,
Yeah.
they become like people. It brings
They
out in them a different side,
yes,
and
100%.
also they want to express themselves because they're incarcerated, and
Yes.
they want to be,
Yeah.
it's crazy what this does.
100%. I mean, like this was really unique.
Yeah.
I wish I had a picture of it actually.
Yeah. Wow. Now, what happens if a person, is sentenced and he's supposed to go to prison and he gets matched up in a room or whatever it was in a cell with a psychopath, with some crazy dude.
Yeah.
Then this guy's, he comes in for a few months, whatever it was.
So
Are there psychopaths in there, or they
Yeah.
belong in, there's mental institutions for these people?
well, unfortunately, a lot of these institutions are just so overburdened that they just don't have the capacity, and so
So
therefore
they leave them in,
there are yes there are
between the sane people.
So generally speaking, corrections, whether it's state corrections, city corrections, they usually don't want to put the lions with the lambs.
Right.
Just because it's a liability, not because they want to be nice, just because it's a
Right,
liability
right.
to them.
Right.
I mean, if they're going to put a guy with, if they put a 55-year-old white Jewish guy in
Yeah.
a cell with, a hardcore gang member
Yeah.
who's waiting
Yeah.
trial on a murder case,
Right.
chances are something's going to happen, and so
Right.
therefore it's
someone-
just bad for them.
So someone is actually evaluating.
Yes,
This guy belongs in this
Not
camp,
only
and
that,
this belongs in
not
this
only
camp.
that, but they evaluate their gang affiliation,
Mm-hmm.
so they know who's affiliated with who, and they know, and they know this based on the tattoos that they have. They
Yeah,
know this based on the information they get from the
a
police
whole
department.
world.
It's a whole world. Figuring out, doing the gang shidduchim and making sure that people are in the appropriate housing
Unbelievable.
and who has beef with who is a full-time job.
Full-time
It is a full-time job. Literally, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
They have gang investigators within the jails, and so yes, they usually try keeping people that are not going to have. But that being said, are there acts of violence that occur every day? Of course, for all different types of real or perceived reasons that come up while either they're in jail or stuff that may have happened out on the street still,
Right.
stuff that's, hanging around for many years. Who knows?
Now, I know in prisons and in the camps and places like that, when you're settled already, they try at least to, get they have like they pray together. They give them, what do they call a room? They're not calling it a shul,
Right.
but it's like
A rec?
yeah, whatever. They
Yeah,
come
there
together
are-
and they daven.
Yeah.
But in a jail, or let's say Rikers, a place like that, how does Shabbos and Yom Tov look in that place?
There's no such shot. There's no shot.
It's just a regular Wednesday.
It's just a regular Wednesday. Yeah.
And that is painful for a person who was used to so many years.
Yeah.
Sitting with his family. It's next level pain.
It's horrible. It really is.
Horrible.
But I mean, like I said, for white collar cases, it's rare. In the state system, and particularly and also in the federal system, for there to be pretrial detention. But once they go to a facility, whether it's on this federal system, the Otisville usually, there's
There's these places.
yeah.
Now, what do you see with people who are incarcerated? Do they become more spiritual? They what do they, with your clients, did you see that a person changed? Let's say you started off one way, a couple of years later, he's sitting with the Mrs. Woodham and he's giving meaning to it. Do you see rehabilitation?
So when most of my practice is trial level work. So I do a lot of work, in state and federal court at the trial court level. I do appellate work also. So I do that. I mean, that's really why I have some, some background about what
Right.
goes on in a lot of these facilities.
Yeah.
So I talk to clients once they're already incarcerated when you're
Right.
doing an appeal. But once you're sort of done with the case, it's rare that I
It's rare
follow
that you
up with
follow
them
up.
to see.
It's
Although
not
I
it's
have,
not a relationship you meant to say.
yeah, I mean, I have had clients reach out to me after and
Yeah.
thank me.
Wow.
I was walking around the courthouse one day, and I was about to go into the bathroom over there, and there's some guy comes and goes, "Oh, Mr. Amsel, thank you so much." I didn't even recognize the guy.
Wow.
It was a client from years ago that
Right. Right.
he was working in the courthouse for like I think he was on parole at the time, so he was like part of his parole was he was like cleaning he was cleaning the bathroom, and I literally didn't recognize the
But
guy.
he
It was so long
remembered
ago.
you. He remembered
He
you.
remembered me. And he came over. He hugged me. But like so that's a guy. It's nice to see those stories of people that have helped them. But for the most part, like once
Yeah, it's like a client. You move on, and that's it.
that's not to say while
Right.
I'm with
Yeah.
them, I'm not invested. Of
Yeah,
course
of
I am.
course.
I'm
Yeah.
heavily invested. You want to
Yeah.
do right by your client, but I mean, I don't always necessarily get to see the end of the story.
Right. Also, there is a black market. They have their own economy over there. Did you know anything about this? Like, they're selling their own stuff. It's like
Yeah.
their own little world.
It is. Well, any area. I mean, you saw this in communist Russia. You
Right.
see this, and anywhere where
These
there
are
are
humans.
restrictions,
Yeah.
where you have humans that have restrictions on them. The
They
human
will do-
spirit yearns to be free,
It's
and yearns
also
to.
part of the creativity.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
barter
100%.
and it's a whole business
Yeah.
thing over there.
Yeah.
And that's illegal. I mean, these are illegal
Well,
stuff.
I mean, if
And
you're
how-
selling stuff that you're not
and
allowed to,
how do they pull it off?
a lot of times there are correctional officers who are.
We're like behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Because today is a world of cameras and videos, and
it's tough.
I think that there's cell phones now in the jails.
There are.
How is that possible? Because when I used to go visit years ago, my friend, and there was you cannot get a cell phone in there.
You'd be surprised. People are very creative, but no, I mean,
No, I
it's-
understand, but you can see them on social media
Yeah.
today.
Yeah,
How are they pulling this off? I don't get it.
like I said, a lot of times there's.
But
help.
then if it's on social media,
mean,
then the cops will find out.
Look,
Someone's gonna find out.
I mean, I'm not saying people are smart about how they do it, but I mean, the feds just locked up not too long ago a bunch of officers at Rikers Island
Because
for smuggling stuff in and being on the take, and
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you about this. Is a huge topic, and you see it always. They talk about it all over, about the shoe, about solitary
Yeah.
confinement. So this is cruel and unusual punishment. Now, that is next level also. I mean, but again, I understand there must be punishment in punishment. Like if they're punished already, they're in prison. How are you going to punish them? So if to keep them in line. But what's your opinion on this solitary confinement? The person goes in there for a month, 2 months, with a pencil and a paper.
yeah. Look, a lot of times people can't be in general pop, like either for their own safety, like think of like a cop who's been incarcerated, like
Right.
he can't be out.
What does
Population.
that do to your psyche?
I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. I mean, seeing nothing but a wall for 23 hours a day. I mean, it's terrible.
Sometimes I wonder what humans can survive.
Yeah.
Because, a person who was sitting 7, 8 years, he went into the shoe a few times, few months. He has like a whole, I was there, like in different times, but he has like months that he spent in the shoe. This guy is still sane. It's like, but there's a movement there's a whole big.
There's been a movement in the New York City Department of Corrections to end solitary confinement.
What other options do they have?
I mean, honestly, they just renamed it. They instead of solitary confinement, it's segregated housing or some other euphemism. But I mean, it's.
But is it possible for someone to go through the prison system for a couple of years, let's say, and not end up in the shoe, or every single one of them, for some odd reason, there is a fight, there's people that you were looking there, you were standing there, you end up there?
It's a horrible condition, put it that way.
Horrible condition. That is not a good place to be.
No.
As far as you're dealing with families and children, what is the most heartbreaking story that you ever that really shook you to the core, that took you over?
I wouldn't say that there's any one individual story, but watching the effect of a criminal case on someone's life, on someone's family. You have clients that their marriages collapse, children are alienated from them. I think it's sort of a general experience that occurs. And it's just like I had a client not too long ago that, his 4-year-old kid was in court, and You know, judge put him in, and the kid doesn't understand
Right.
like
Right.
what's really happening.
Right.
And you know, watching the kid crying outside, that, you know, he has no clue, he has no idea.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, the judge will say, or the prosecutor will say, well, he wasn't thinking about his kid when he did
Right.
X, Y, and
Right.
Z. You know, he wasn't thinking about
Right.
you know his family. He wasn't, you know, he should have thought about that before he did
Right.
that. You know,
But it's heartbreaking.
but it's still nonetheless. I mean, there is a human, certainly a human cost. You know, when you're a prosecutor, you only focus on the victims,
Right.
and then you know when you're a defense attorney, you see the other side. And
It's part of the business.
yeah.
Now, did you ever defend somebody that you taught inside that he's guilty?
I mean, if I had never represented a guilty client before, then either I was very inexperienced or very naive.
Delusional, yeah.
I mean, it happens all the time.
Right.
I would have no clients if I only represented innocent people.
Right.
But the reality is that I'm a professional. I have a role. The prosecutor has a role. The judge has a role. And my job is to zealously advocate for my client.
Correct.
Regardless of the circumstances. That is my job. That is my role. That is what makes our system function.
Right.
Having people, and you know what? If you or someone you loved was in that situation,
You would also want
somebody
to fight.
and not only that, but you know, people, oh, you know, what do you know, how do you sleep at night when you know you got this guilty person? You know, they fundamentally misunderstand what the role of a criminal defense attorney is. The role of a criminal defense attorney fundamentally is to keep the government in check, to make sure that there are no excesses, to make sure that the client does not get abused, because even if he or she is 100% guilty, there is still a process. There is still a system. There are still rules and laws that must be followed. Just like he's being prosecuted for violating laws, there are also laws that keep the government in check.
Correct.
And the reason that there are those laws that keep the government in check is because we in the United States have had, and especially Orthodox Jews and Jews in particular, we've had experience with what happens when there's a public outcry and when we want to dispense with the rules and just go ahead and get those guys, whether those guys are the criminals, whether those guys are Jews or other minorities. And so it's critical that we zealously advocate and that we stand up for those rules. Because you know what? If you look at the United States Constitution, if you look at the Bill of Rights, which were passed in 1792, going back to the very 4 years after the founding of this of the Constitution, there's 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. The last two don't really relate to individual rights, the sort of rights about how the state and the federal government relate to each other, and sort of a general statement of rights, the Ninth Amendment for individuals. But amendments 1 through 8, half of those amendments relate to the rights of criminal defendants. Okay, you have the Fourth Amendment, free from unreasonable search and seizure. Okay, you have the Fifth Amendment, right to due process, right to a trial, compulsory process in any criminal case, right to remain silent, all rights that apply to criminal defendants. Sixth Amendment, right to counsel, right to confront the witnesses against you, right to a public trial within the Sixth Amendment. Eighth Amendment, no excessive bail or no cruel and unusual punishment.
Right.
So you have half of the top 8 that relate to the rights of criminal defendants. The right to habeas corpus is in the actual Constitution itself that was adopted in 1787. And so these are rules that exist for a reason. And the reason they exist is because when you have a society that sort of others people, when you have a society that sort of dispenses with the rules in their zeal to try to get people, you have tyranny.
Right.
And so, you know, my role as a criminal defense attorney is to make sure that those rules are zealously followed.
Right. You're keeping them in check.
You're keeping them in check. And whether that means, you know, making sure that, you know, the sentence is not excessive, whether that means that you're advocating for a lower sentence to a judge, whether that means that you're going to trial and trying to get the guy acquitted. At the end of the day, the government has the burden of proving their case to a jury of your peers beyond a reasonable doubt. And unless and until they can do that, they cannot incarcerate somebody.
Wow.
And they cannot take away their liberty. And so that's my job, that's my role. And it's not about whether the guy is innocent or guilty. I'm sure that's important on a moral level. But at the end of the day, my role is to keep the government in check.
100%.
And
It's important.
and if it's you that's sitting in that chair, you want somebody on your side that's not
Correct.
going to fold over.
Correct.
You want somebody on your side that's going to be in your corner.
Correct. What is the most outrageous injustice that you ever experienced?
Again, also, it's hard to sort of pick one individual case right now off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But I would say, seeing people fold just because they don't have the wherewithal or the guts or or just the desire to go through and see a case through to the end. I've had trials where, were just terribly unfair. But for the most part, it's within the margin of error, I would say.
Have you ever had to walk away from a case?
Occasionally there can be disagreements
With the client?
with
This
the
is with the
client.
client?
Yeah. But
Not a
usually
lot. You
I'm a
don't
very
see-
easygoing guy.
Yeah.
I'm I will bend over backwards to try try to accommodate.
You were
So
mentioning before that you have the right to remain silent. Now, when someone is approached by a police officer, cop, or something, everyone says yes, cooperate. But on the other hand, should you be quiet, not talk? What is your right?
Your right is to remain silent, and you should take that right, and you should exercise that right. Because the number of people that I have seen who have talked their way out of criminal charges is absolutely zero.
Wow.
Okay? No one has ever talked themselves out. It is, and here's the worst part. Sometimes when you are approached by a police officer, or when you're questioned by an officer or an investigator or an agent or whatever the case may be, you don't know whether or not even admitting something as slight as where you live can be an important fact. You don't know whether even admitting the fact that you own a particular car can be an important fact in the case. Wow. Like take the hit and run, for example. They may have video surveillance of a black Mercedes leaving the scene of a hit and run. Cop walks up to your house, knocks on your door. Hey, do you have a black Mercedes? Is that your black Mercedes parked outside? Yeah, that's mine. Now you just admitted that you own that car.
Right.
And you have no idea how that admission is important. Right. So, in the context of a greater investigation. Right. So, I always say you have a right to remain silent and you should exercise it. I'm not giving anybody legal advice.
But the idea is that they know they have a way also how to make you talk.
Absolutely. And they're
professional at it.
Yes, there are documented cases of false confessions. 100%. There are people that confess to crimes that are that they've never committed. It happens. There are experts that testify about these types of things. And then most people say, oh, well, I would never confess. Right. A lot of times, there are mental health issues. A lot of times the person will have been in a precinct for 24, 36. There was a case, I forget out of which state, where a guy confessed to killing his mother, and it turned out she was alive.
Oh, my God.
It was all over the news, and he ended up settling for $850,000, which frankly I thought was a low number. But this guy was brought in by I think it was maybe like Minnesota or something.
How does someone do that?
These cops literally, they say either Angreta Kittenbo, literally they told him because she was an elderly mother and he lived with her or something, and she's gone, like she's missing. We found blood at the house, and they pounded this guy for 12 hours straight. And they come in, they come out, they play good cop, bad cop, and this guy ended up confessing to killing his mother, and then they found his mother in the grocery store a day later. She was just she had dementia or something. She'd been wandering around. Yeah, so it happens. It happens. It really and this guy was whatever. He's still living with his mother. I don't know what the story was over there.
Right, but they got him to admit.
But they got him to admit that he killed his mother and he was completely innocent. She was alive.
Crazy story. Now I want to talk about an issue which is, it's very important about DWIs and all these, especially teenagers.
Yeah.
I've seen little clips of people losing their lives. Their future. You're looking about 20-year-olds standing in front of the judge, and they have a whole future ahead of them. What is your message for these young people?
My message is that in life, there are mistakes that you can make that you just can't come back from. You know, like everybody, oh, don't cry over spilt milk. Oh, mistakes happen. Mistakes happen. It's not just say you're sorry. You can say you're sorry, but sorry doesn't fix the lamp. Yeah. There are mistakes that you can make in life that you can't come back from. And those, you know, DWI and stuff like that can
because
happen.
these are innocent kids who can kill their friends or can kill themselves.
It's horrible.
How many? I mean, I can't even watch these.
And the worst part about it is that usually when they get into the car and drive, they're by definition already impaired. So their judgment is already impaired by being drunk.
Right.
And they're getting into, like, you know, if you ask them in a sober moment, do you think it was the right thing to, they would of course say no, of course not. You know, but and then it's horrible. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it starts by a party. It starts by just a simcha here, there.
Yeah.
And you don't know how many people I know. They say, "I'm okay. I can do it.
I'm good."
But like you said, this is a mistake that you can never fix.
Yeah. And you know, everybody always says, you know, but by the grace of God go I. You know, and so I'll be okay. And you know, the reality is that the majority of times that people do it, they get away with it.
They get away with it.
They get away because, I mean, thank God nothing happens.
Yeah. What is your experience? You saw a family who is going through with a other family member who's you know, either incarcerated or going through a trial. Did you find that the burden that the family thinks is beyond? It's
beyond. They live and die with every ruling. They live and die with everything. And the worst part about it is that sometimes they don't even understand, as they're sitting in the audience, they don't even fully understand the significance of things until after it's happened. And we go out in the hallway after something's happened, and I sit there and try to explain to them like what actually occurred. Because I mean that's the worst part. Most of the time it's just like the bewilderment, just like, wait, so what just happened? You know.
Right.
But no, I mean it wears on family, friends.
So what kind of crimes do you see? Do you see DWIs? Do you see you know, like what kind of criminal crimes is common in your office?
I do a variety of state and federal white collar and blue collar criminal charges. So I mean, I handle everything from racketeering and white collar fraud cases all the way on down to drunk driving cases. I mean, I handle in state and federal court. I handle the gamut. I mean, it runs the gamut. It really does.
Now, what is the reason behind all these crimes? Is this like desperate for money? Is it for stupidity? Is it what is the drive behind this? And how can a person say, you know what, I don't want to go through this system. I want to be a good citizen.
Yeah, I mean, look. So, I mean, it really depends on the type of case. Sometimes you have cases that are, you know, crimes of passion. Sometimes you have crimes that are crimes of desperation. Sometimes you have crimes of, you know, premeditation. Sometimes you have crimes that are, you know, out of a combination of all of those, whether it's desperation. And then you have crimes just out of good old greed. Yeah. You know, or probably, particularly in the white collar sphere. Yeah. What you see a lot is, you know, you get involved with something.
It's gray.
Maybe it's gray. You're not quite sure. You kind of have an inkling that it's not kosher, but you kind of go along with it because that's how things get done. And why are they picking on me? Right. You know? And then it sort of starts snowballing. And then the money gets too good to walk away from it. And then you're just
not thinking about the
stuck.
Consequences.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of that. And then, you know, there could be other social pressures that play into it. So, you know, there are a number of different reasons why. And by the way, these are not necessarily bad people.
Yeah,
you know,
these are criminal minds.
No, I mean, like they're not. You know, I have a lot of clients that are just, you know, regular, ordinary people that made bad decisions. You know, they say in sports, you're never as bad as your worst loss. You're never as good as your best win. Yeah. You know, same idea. You know, you're never as but like most of the time, you're never as bad as the worst thing you've ever done. You're never as good as the best thing you've ever done. Right. You know, you're somewhere in between.
Wow. And it's tough. I assume it's tough because, you know, sometimes it's greed and sometimes pressure, money, and whatever reason, people working hard and they're not making it. Yeah. You know? There's a million reasons why it would drive a person to do it. So in your opinion, They call it correction facilities. Is it a punishment or is it supposed to be a rehabilitation?
It's one of the great misnomers within the system, calling it correctional facilities. There's nothing about There's very little correction going on. It's a punishment. It's about segregating you from society and making sure that you don't commit any additional crimes during that period.
Right.
I think that, sure, are there people, does that correct you in a way? Maybe, because it teaches you the consequences and it says you don't want to do it ever again.
Right.
But is there like rehabilitation, like they have in Sweden, where they're, no, it's not.
Like a cush.
No, it's not. Right. It's not. It's. Even these camps, that you talk about, like Otisville or whatever.
Right. It's also not a party.
No, who wants to be there?
Right. You seem like a good attorney. Like attorney was on top of your game. What is a bad attorney? Like a corrupt attorney? There's some people who there's an attorney that is going to be like, take the plea, or he's treating you like a piece of, like.
Yeah. So what is a bad attorney? Maybe I think the best way to answer that question is to say what a good attorney does.
Okay.
All right. I'm not going to cast aspersions on anyone else, but I think the number one thing that you need to be a good attorney is diligence, okay? You have to follow every lead, leave no stone unturned. If that means working 12, 14, 16, 18-hour days, which I do, then that's what you need to do. Because you have an obligation and a duty to your client, and somebody is relying on you. Somebody has paid you, or whatever the case may be. And
his life is on the line.
And his life is on the line, and appreciating the consequences.
Attorney has to know this.
Yes, and you need to carry that with you. So I think the number one thing that you need to do, you need to have is a level of diligence and vigilance, meaning constantly, on your toes and making sure that you take nothing for granted, and that you are reviewing everything, and you are making sure that you leave no stone unturned. I think that is more than compassion, more than empathy for the client, more than anything in the world, is just a responsibility of being vigilant and diligent in what you do. And I think that if you have that level of heightened vigilance and heightened diligence, and you're not just sort of cutting corners and getting by with, it's good enough that I show up. Like I am, like, my biggest fear in life is showing up to court being unprepared.
Of course.
It's like my biggest fear. And yet, there are attorneys that maybe don't have that fear.
Right.
All right. So I think that is the number one thing that you need. If you have a good, nice bedside manner, that's all great and wonderful. All right. If you're good with juries, if you have a good persona, if you have, if you have the ability to, to win over judges and juries, and if you have there
is something about storytelling, right?
100%. 100%. As a trial lawyer, sure, you do that all the time. Being able to relate to people on like a visceral level, being able to relate to what drives people, how people think, how people feel. Absolutely. That's critical.
Also have to be on top of refresher courses as far as the law changes goes this way, that way.
That's part of diligence. That's part of being diligent.
Correct.
Is making sure that if there's a change, you're on top of your game, keeping abreast with changes in the law, like attending your CLEs, and not only just attending them and sitting on your phone, but attending them, and CLEs are continuing legal education, those courses you mentioned. But making sure that you're actually getting something out of them. So 100%.
I'm taking out of it is that there is a lot of work.
Yes.
Joe, I want to thank you for pulling back the curtain on a world that a lot of people don't even know exists. You remind us that choices is what's important. Got to be vigilant. You should always be able to protect and to be a voice for the people who need you. And you should have a lot of naches, and you should have a lot of health and wealth, and you and your family should always be matzliach.
Oh, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.